going to visit America in a different way today. And we've talked about America before. I've talked about self-rule as one of the great ideas of the human family. And that we've talked about this and used the metaphor of the dance between liberty and equality or equity, and how the two must dance together. But there's another way of seeing this, and it's from an ethical and morality point of view. And I'm getting a lot of my inspiration from Code Breakers, Jennifer Doudna, and the gene editing and the future of the human race, because it literally is the future of the human race, and how we decide which of these two ideas we're going to go with. And not so much as equality and liberty, but as individual and community. You see, these two ideas of individual and community, they make up who we are, and the greatest spokespeople for these two seemingly divergent views, they're the Johns. I call them the Johns. John Locke and John Stuart Mill. If you really look at the way self-rule emerged and became liberal democracy, it was an amazing conversation of letters and ideas and philosophies. You can see it coalescing in the Federalist Papers and finally in the Constitution and Bill of Rights within our own people. A liberal democracy is basically, democracy means ruled by the people. And it includes these checks and balances on power and how we come to discern those checks and balances. Now with John Locke, and I'm going to just read a short little piece here from Codebreaker, the most great moral issues. On the most great oral issues, there are two competing perspectives. One emphasizes individual rights, personal liberty, and a deference to personal choice, stemming from John Locke and other Enlightenment thinkers of the 17th century. This tradition recognizes that people will have different beliefs about what is good for their lives, and it argues that the state should give them a lot of liberty to make their own choices as long as they do not harm others. Now, there's all these contrasting perspectives, and those that view justice and morality through the lens of what's best for society, and perhaps even, in the case of bioengineering and climate policy, what's best for the species. And these are like requirements for school kids to be vaccinated, that people must wear masks during a pandemic, and the emphasis on societal benefits rather than individual rights can take the form of John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism, which seeks the greater amount of goodness and happiness in a society, even if it means trampling on the liberty of some individuals. These two ideas, these two moral perspectives inform us and are continuing today. As a matter of fact, the great dividing point in America today is precisely along the fault lines of these two ideas of morality. And so I thought it was important for us to have a sense, or at least discuss, what's going on in our midst from the deeper side of ideas. Because today we can reduce this whole concept. John Locke, it's unfettered freedom, uncontrollable. The only thing that controls it is going to be nature. And nature is seen as reason. And up to the point of where you're destroying others and property, it's basically protect freedom, that the state's role is to protect freedom, and that freedom needs to be protected from the state. Think about that, what's going on in society today. Meanwhile, John Mill, he talks about the three spheres of liberty. One is within, freedom of thought. Two is to pursue a life that suits your character. You're free to do. And the third one includes the first two, but also the freedom to unite up to the point where you can't do harm. And if you look at it, you see, the majority in John Locke can rule. And in John Stuart Mill, the majority can become tyrannical. And we're seeing exactly what's going on in that today. and if you listen to the conversations around not just what happened January 6th, but also COVID. So today we're going to really reduce these to a battle that we can get our hands around. The individual, it's about wealth. Hey, I was free to make all this money. I got it, and you shouldn't tell me what I can do and what I can't do with it. And the other is society, the community. And this is the battle what's going on right now. And you can listen to the news, and this is why I love 24/7 news, even though it's really freaking crazy. That there's this, you can hear the echoes of these ideas, and you can see them. And I'll be honest, Fox, I can't watch for very long because it's so John Lockean, and there's no dance involved at all. So today we're going to talk about America's two ideas whose roots really go to who we think we are and how we think we are morally. And there's a lot of decisions that have to be made morally. Are they going to be made in terms of the individual, or are they going to be made in terms of the community? You see, those are both freedoms. And each can impinge on the other in very serious ways. So, one America, two ideas with deep, deep roots that go through the whole history of humankind, back through the 17th and 18th century. Actually, you could find it in the Bible. I mean, that's why Ruth was such a powerful leader, because they sat in a circle back then, and whoever had the wisest voice was the one they listened to. But that's a whole different story. Today, one America, two ideas. So, Brother Bob, what say you on these two ideas between the Johns?
Well, I'm glad you've taken it back further in history than just the 17th century, because I think that these are the two ideas that have been with us as long as we've been human beings. And like most of the things we discuss, and I use the term all the time, it comes back to balance. Because if you go to the extreme in either of these ideas, if you go to the extreme of individual freedom, then you end up with oligarchs, with tyrants, with strongmen, with warlords, with the person who can convince people to support them against anything else. They can have their own private armies, they can have their own way of doing things, and nobody can stop them because they have ultimate freedom. If you go the other way, to the extreme, then you have some sort of a committee that's going to make decisions. And as we all know, there's very, very few times that any committee has ever come up with a good decision, because what's the old saying? A camel is a horse developed by a committee, and it makes it very difficult to get things done. So we're always bouncing back and forth between the two extremes, and we're searching for that middle point that can work for everyone. And that, in my opinion, is really the story of America, is how do we find that central point of balance?
That's right. And it is a moral journey, which we're finding out by uncovering these narratives that have covered up some of our moral shortcomings, to put it nicely. Marianne, how about you?
Yeah, I think that says it all. My view of America has always been us looking for a balance between these two ideals. And what do we do to not, and I think as individuals, and I talk about this all the time, that we have to develop ourselves individually before we can even try to shape a culture that is beneficent, right? Yeah. And until we can get clear with ourselves, then that comes back to the individual's responsibility And then what are they responsible for and to? And that's where it goes out into the community. So then we are responsible for each other. We're our brother's keeper.
Yeah.
The whole idea of we do not live in a vacuum.
Right.
And
But
we can't.
and that's the point where community is shaping the individual. So
Yeah.
it's a reciprocal thing.
We shape the road, and the road shapes us.
Yeah.
Right.
So you can't really separate the individual from the community, and this is part of what we're trying to understand. And some of our billionaire astronauts, what we don't recognize is how much money they are putting into food banks, healthcare, all other kinds of things that are earth tending. And yet the battle, if you listen to the conversation, is again between the individual, the wealth, and the community. Why? And Bob, you intone this. It gets back to the primal battle that's thousands of years old of peace through power versus peace through justice. Peace through justice takes the community into consideration, if you will. You see, the state is there to protect the community, to ensure that everybody has the freedom. Whereas within John Locke's view, the law is there to be created to expand freedom in all directions, all the time. And again, Stuart Smith is there to temper the freedom of the powerful in the name of the community, so that there is a fundamental fairness, which is what justice is really about, can occur for all the people. So this, and I didn't mean to cut you off, Marianne, but I was getting excited about some of the stuff you were saying. And, the whole concept of being shaped by the community, and then you go out into the community to shape it, it's so reciprocal that how do we have to nudge both sides at the same time. And it feels to me like these two ideas are in play right now, very out loud. And I'm going to shoot that to you, Marianne, because I cut you off, and I really didn't mean to.
Oh, that's okay. I agree. It is out loud right now. But I think part of this too, yes, we are shaped by the community, and the community shapes us. I mean, we shape the community, but we also, I think it comes back to the fundamental, both of these ideas can be brought into balance. I think that there is a balance that we need to find. But I think what we have to determine is, what is the basic human nature? Do we need to be controlled, or are we capable of self-control? And do we have an internal locus of a control or external? And I think both of these reflect those in their own ways. And so do we need, like you said, peace through power or peace through justice? And justice comes from that communal belief that we are responsible for each other.
Yeah.
And so where do we go from there?
And what I want us to do today is just to see how these two ideas are at play. I don't think we're going to have balance for a while. And I completely believe that we should have balance, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't. But I want our conversation to be about seeing these ideas in play, so that when we, hopefully, it's interesting, January 6th is Epiphany in the church. I went, no, that's an American Epiphany Day. That if the hearings are out loud and we get to hear them, watch the ideas at play. If you really listen to the Matts Getz and the Taylor Greens, they're basically saying, I am so free, I can talk about space lasers and you can't do anything about it. That's really what she's saying. I'm at liberty to say anything I want. Now, that's a John Lockean point of view, okay? And the only thing in John Locke's point of view that is going to mediate that is reason, because it's about nature. John Locke thinks that we are good by nature, okay? Now, John Stuart Mill doesn't go quite that far. He sees our nature as a little more complex, and this is why he develops a utilitarian, which is basically an action is good when when it's good for everybody. And now we're talking justice. So you see this tug and pull of the freedom of the individual and trying to assure that and to ensure it, and the integrity of the community for the sake of health and wholeness, that how these are interacting. And I want us to be able to talk about it. And I mean, the whole mask and vaccine thing, Fauci said it beautifully. He said, if it was 100 years ago, we never would have wiped out smallpox. If it was 50 years ago, we never would have wiped out polio. And people are now exercising their right of liberty to the point where it is now threatening the lives of children. And this is quite I think John Locke would have a problem with this. However, it's that idea that is in play. And I want us to start seeing, especially with our listeners, when we listen to 24/7 News, when we read an article, to see this play of ideas and to see the deep moral issue of them. Right now with gene editing, these are the issues that they're talking about. Who has the right? If only the rich have the right to edit their genes, then is everybody going to be created equal? It's an amazing thing. How do we balance this? And how do we balance the integrity of the system and assure the sanctity of life, that we don't go and screw that up totally? So we're at a crossroads where these two ideas are at play politically, they're at play genetically, they're at play
economically,
Yes.
and globally with climate change. So I want our listeners to begin to address and hear these threads of ideas as part of the human family's brilliant idea of self-rule, and the dance between these ideas, that we might come to a little closer way of simply expressing something that is very complex, which to me is what the new narrative is about. Go ahead, Bob.
Let me throw out a metaphor. We talk about this idea of balance, but balance is not static. Balance is always shifting one way or the other. And if you envision these ideas, or if you could chart these ideas like a sine wave, one direction of the sine wave is toward liberty, and the other direction is toward justice. And we're always moving back and forth between the two. And that movement can be beautiful. It can be like music. But if you go too far in either direction, then it becomes problematic. You lose the pureness of the tone, to use the musical metaphor. It becomes noise. And our job is to constantly, one side or the other is not right or wrong. It's just the extremes of each side that becomes wrong. And if we can, in our own self-evaluations, look at the way our ideas are forming, and if we can rein in those ideas before they get too far in either direction, then we can maintain that level of balance.
Well, and now we're back to talking about how to do it, and
Right.
I want us to keep going back to this piece of how we begin to think about it. Now, I have a motive for this, and the motive is, I'm going to leave balance to people. I want to talk about, as a mythopoet, what are the ways that we can recontext the individual and community. One of the ways I see is the context of the individual becomes an ambassador for the community itself. And with all, if you can, all this space stuff with billionaires, I'm for it. Okay, I'll just say that. If you listen to these guys talk, and that 82-year-old woman who just got back, and that rhetoric is going to echo in a way that is going to inspire and aspire whole generations of people to re-envision how their individuality fits within this greater context of reach for the human family. And if we quit thinking about it as billionaires and thinking of it, again, I'm back to Alan Watts' Beyond Theology, it is, what are human beings going to do? We're going to play. We're going to, the people who are richest, they're going to take the latest toys, the latest technology, and they're going to play. Something's going to come of it. Okay? So these people, and I see Bill Gates is a huge one, he began to see himself as an ambassador for the human family. And he saw something he could touch and address, which had to do with epidemics and health and a whole series of things. He and Melinda both. I think these rich folks, they're waking up to an accountability and a responsibility that is taking the individual, not serving themselves, although, their ego's getting fed, but also seeing themselves as an ambassador. All of them believe if we get enough people in space, the governments will start taking bigger interest. We're going to run out of resources here. There's tons of resources at the asteroid belt. How many steps between us and the asteroid belt? A ton. Somebody's got to take the little steps, and regrettably, the marketplace leads. So individual, wealth, and community, I think there's a new understanding, and I don't mean to poo-poo the idea of balance because I'm totally on board with that. My intent with this episode is to how can we think about COVID and the conversations around it, climate change and the conversations around it, the billionaire astronauts and the conversation around it, and begin to see these two ideas at play and give our listeners a way to begin to see those ideas at play. Because it's not balanced now, and we can do a whole episode on how to balance it. We're not going to solve that in the next 10 minutes. So how do we give them more ways to see these ideas in play?
Well, I think, Red Hawk, that you see these billionaires in a much brighter light than I do. I kind of see them more as self-appointed kings, and they are dictating society through their money. And so it's almost the whole
Yeah, and
idea.
I don't want to get into a conversation about that. I want to give people, because that's the ideas are at play. And it's
and that's they are proposing those ideas that basically is Locke, right? But anyway, I think that to get to the broader point of how do we go forward with this, the first thing I think is we have to stop demonizing each other, and we have to start listening to other points of view, people that don't agree with us. What's happened is, when someone attacks your idea or what you think, people are taking that as personal attacks, that it's an attack against them. And it's not. It's an attack against an idea. So I think we have to start to elevate to conversations around ideas and solutions, and not necessarily around individual egos or whatever is driving these things, right and wrong. We have to be more solution oriented.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of.
But I think we have to step up and identify the extremists, and we cannot allow them to keep propagating their ideas at the extremes. We have to pull back on that, and that's why I say that balance is so important. Let me.
Well, that's in a way, that's very John Locke. I mean, even John Locke would say that it's time to pull back.
Well, let's just go back to the example of the billionaire astronauts. I think it's great. I'm 100% behind anything that advances our movement into space, because I think that's part of our evolution. But at the same time that they're spending their billions on space, they're not paying any taxes. So
Amen. Now that's the issue, isn't it?
Right.
Well, that's the idea of pulling back on the extreme. It's fine if they want to make a bunch of money and use it any way they want to that doesn't harm people. But at the same time, they have a responsibility to the community to pay their fair share of taxes and not use loopholes and so forth, and not pay tax attorneys millions of dollars so they can avoid paying their fair share.
Well, and then they get to spend their money on what they want to. I don't get to choose what I spend what my tax dollars go to. They don't have to put it into a military budget. So I want us to get. So what you're defining here is the upper limit. We only have a few minutes left. You're defining an upper limit of what constitutes harm, and at that point, the harm is to the community by not being able, by putting the burden of taxes on the small person and not allowing it to equally be. And that's what I want us to understand, that these are ideas in play where liberty has taken liberties and taken away from the community things that are owed to the community. And it's about these ideas. And they're both valid ideas. They just don't work by themselves. You can't say your life is dependent on a heart without a kidney and a liver and a spleen. It takes them all. So, and Bob, you talked about balance at the beginning. It's homeostasis. How do we get these things to go? And learning to see, and Marianne, this is something I think you intoned as well as Bob. It's not about the person and demonizing them. It's about elucidating the ideas. And John Locke said that nature controls things through reason. And so we have to somehow reason our way with ideas. I really want to demonize Taylor Green and Getz. I mean, I really do, and Jim Jordan. But my study this week makes it difficult because I see the ideas they're holding on to, and I see how they've just gone too far down that road. So, Marianne, how do we get back to ideas?
Well, and I think using those examples that you just put out, there are things that we have to oppose. There are things that are detrimental. And so I think you were talking about that as well, Bob. But, the whole idea of where is the line in the sand that we won't cross? And I think that is where we have. Yeah. Well, I mean, and so I think that's where we have to get back to that whole idea of personal integrity and our personal choices and what we do. And I think you said something about that earlier, Red Hawk, but we have to know where we stand and what we will and will not tolerate in the world that we want to live in. So we're all responsible for shaping the world that we're living in. And how do we do that? And we can only do that when we recognize that other people are human beings. And that's the common denominator, bottom line. And if that's the only thing that we can find that we have in common, then that's where we have to start. I mean, I would think that our society would have progressed a little bit further by now, but it seems like we've regressed. And so how do we get back to that place where we can say, okay, we're on this planet together, and how are we going to go forward?
Yeah. So. And with all the new narratives we have to include in that now, that's what makes it imperative, so difficult and also so imperative. Bob, final comments for you? Marianne, I'm going to come back to you for a final comment, a short one. Go ahead, Bob.
I can also look at these two ideas in terms of patriarchy versus matriarchy. Patriarchy is the strong man. Matriarchy is the nurturing society. And I think one of the things that gives me a lot of hope is that we're having more female voices in the dialogue. And the more we can bring females into the political process, into business, there are many studies now that show female CEOs bring a whole new way of dealing in the corporate environment, a much more sharing, collaborative kind of thing. And as a male, I have to pull back my male ego and realize that the female perspective is an important tool in bringing us back to balance.
Amen. Marianne, final comment?
Well, I would just have to applaud that, Bob, because I totally agree 100%. I was just having a conversation
You better
this
damn
morning.
well agree.
Well, and I just had a conversation this morning about the countries that seem to have weathered the COVID a little bit better were women-led countries, and I don't have the facts to back that up. It was just something but it goes to what you're saying about the corporations, and I think that yes, we do need to respect the individual, but we also need to take care of the collective.
Amen. Amen. And you know, part of what we do here is we just tug on threads. And there's this conversation going on, and we just couldn't not tug on the threads of these basic ideas that inform us, and for us to all see that they're ideas, and that we can be owned by the ideas, or the ideas can own us. And the difference between the two, it's the questions we ask. You know, if we keep asking the questions, it's amazing. You know, the political cartoon where the Southerner is saying, we want to preserve our heritage, don't take down our statues. And then 2 days later, they're saying, we need to get rid of our heritage. We don't want to tell that story about black folks being abused. You know, it's over and over. It's the questions that lead us. You know, Bob talks about balance, and one of my favorite Moody Blues albums is A Question of Balance. Yeah, what are we going to do? Next week is going to be a week of questions and of the question. We hope you'll join us, and we hope that you follow these ideas and see the play and the dance, because you are it. It's happening in you, around you. In the name of this one love, this one life, be well and blessings.